Welcome to Thought Crime and Keto Crime, where Tracy does the sleuthing so you don't have to.
Anyway, now let's get into part 4, the actual crime. All right. They're home from North Carolina. It's now early August, and Shanann and Nicole Atkinson are scheduled to go to a Louisville conference in Arizona, and Chris is going to take a couple of days off work and stay with the girls so they don't have to leave them with anyone. So Shanann leaves out on August 9th to go to Arizona. Chris took off work on Friday, August 10th, and kept the girls at home. There is a logistical trip that was plotted by the GPS. I remember Chris's truck that he rented from Anadarko, though it was a work truck that because he paid $140 a month, he could use it for personal travel. And it was equipped with a GPS because it was part of Anadarko's fleet. So the GPS easily tracked Chris's route the entire time that the saga was unfolding. And it showed him going to a store parking lot and meeting an Anadarko co-worker to give him an Amazon Fire Stick that Chris had sold him. About that time, his co-worker, Cody Roberts, texted him about a potential leak at Anadarko Site 319, which would end up being the site that the family was disposed of in. And Chris automatically volunteered to check it out and to take care of it Monday morning. In fact, on Sunday the 12th, and Cody Roberts was quoted as saying he thought it was very strange because Chris never radioed anyone at work over the weekend. Going back to the fact that I don't know if Chris was entirely happy working in the petroleum industry, though it was really good money, and said, hey, just wanted to remind you, I'll take care of that leak at 319, and so there's no need for two of us to go. And Cody said he was appreciative, but was just also, it was weird that Chris reached out to coworkers about a job on the weekends. On the 11th, Chris called a friend and asked if his daughter could babysit Bella and Celeste. He wanted to go to a Colorado Rockies game with some friends from work. However, this was untrue. He did get the babysitter, but however, this was untrue. He actually had a date with Nicole. And Nicole, later in her interview, would say that Chris always paid for their dinners either with Anadarko gift cards because they gave their employees lots of perks, and among that was gift cards to some of the more popular restaurants in the area. He either paid with those or he paid with cash. She never once saw him charge anything on a credit card or a debit card for them, and which led her to believe he was, of course, hiding this from his wife, or even though she thought they were going into separation. A lot of weirdness here. But they actually went to the Lazy Dog Saloon and spent around $62, and he did put it on their joint credit card. Immediately, I'm talking the next day on the 12th, and Chris did not get home until after 10:30 at night, which far after the Rockies game would have ended. So Shanann immediately texted Chris the next day because she kept that close a watch on their credit card statements and asked him how he spent $62 at the Lazy Dog Saloon. And he said, oh, I just went with some friends before the Rockies game, and I had salmon and a beer. Well, Shanann not quite buying it, and this is just so weird. She actually checked the menu for the Lazy Dog Saloon to see how much salmon and beer, and it only came, even with tip, to about $40. So she knew he paid for someone else's meal. I don't know if she dropped it after that, or maybe he lied and said he bought one of his coworkers' meals. Anyway, Shanann knew that was bunkus. Also on the 12th, he took Cece and Bella to a friend's birthday party and was seen there all day laughing and having a good time at their birthday party. Later on, Chris Watts, through letters that people had wrote him that you can find on Reddit, just go to any of the Reddit, and I'll post a few below, any of the Reddit subreddits for Chris Watts, you can actually find letters that he writes to people because he has a huge stan out there, a huge fan base that actually think the world of him, and I'm pretty sure a lot of them are going to be here attacking me once this goes up, that actually believe that he's innocent and was framed, that Shanann was a master manipulator. So they write him in prison, and he tells them all kinds of stuff. There's lots of contradictions on those Reddits, but in one of them, he did say that the entire time he was at that birthday party, he was kind of in a trance and just thinking, this may be the last time I see my daughters. That's just creepy. It was also on the 12th that he sent Shanann a picture, the famous doll picture, which I'll insert here. Of a lifelike doll covered with a Twister map from the game Twister that the girls had put on a couch, and it looked like a dead body covered with a sheet. And he actually sent that to Shanann with no explanation, and she texts back, I'm not sure what to think about this. Of all the cases I've covered, this is definitely the creepiest thus far, and I've covered some satanic shit. So Chris texted Shanann a couple of times, although a lot of her calls and texts went unanswered when she was trying to contact him and let him know that her plane was delayed. He didn't answer her. Finally, after 11:30 at night on the 12th, he finally texted Shanann and said, so sorry, I fell asleep on the couch. Neighbors would later say that they saw him bring the girls home from the birthday party, and later on, about 7:30, saw him grilling his dinner on the back deck, and then went inside and they didn't see him again. Supposedly he fell asleep on the couch and did not answer Shanann. Nicole drove herself and Shanann. Nicole Atkinson drove her and Shanann home from the airport, from the Denver airport, and dropped Shanann off in front of her house about 2 a.m. She asked Shanann to let her know how her doctor's appointment was, because Shanann had an appointment with her OBGYN because she was having some blood sugar problems due to all the stress, I'm sure. And she saw Shanann walk up, punch in the code for the front door, and go inside. And their Ring doorbell camera shows the same thing, that she entered around 2 a.m. on early Monday, August 13th. And as we all know, that was the last time anyone ever saw Shannan Watts alive. I would say that the girls coming home from the birthday party was probably the last time anyone saw them alive outside of Chris Watts. Now, this is the hardest part for me. What happened after Shanann entered those doors? We know, because of the neighbor's camera, which we will get into the days after the killings about what happened, but we know from their neighbor's camera that Chris left the house around 5 a.m. on Monday the 13th. So something happened before 5 a.m. So again, because of letters he wrote to other people talking about what actually happened, we know that probably he had already attempted to kill his daughters. So probably between 11 p.m. and 5:15 is when all the killings actually happened. According to Chris Watts' letters on these subreddits, he attempted to smother both Bella and Cece with pillows before Shanann ever got home, and he thought he had accomplished it as they both weren't moving, but come to find out they were only knocked out, if you can believe a word Chris Watts says. Once Shanann came home, he greeted her. He immediately launched into, we need to separate, and basically a fight ensued. And Chris said that he gave his wife Oxycontin and strangled her with his two hands. So I don't know how he gave her the Oxycontin, whether he shoved it, down her throat, or he crumbled it up, put it in water that she drank, or whatever, that he actually killed her on their bed in the master bedroom with his hands, choking her. He then realized that both Cece and Bella were still alive. He said that he attempted to kill them so they would not see him kill their mother. He was still talking about how he was in some kind of blind rage while this was going on. So once he had done the deed with Shanann, he wrapped her in the top sheet, or the bedspread of the bed, and he put her into his work truck. He backed the work truck, which later on a neighbor would say that was very unusual for him to do. He backed it up to the garage. It normally stayed on the street, and he loaded her body into it. He also put his tools for the day, and finally, he put Bella and Cece in the back seat, no car seats, out of view of their mom. He covered up mom so they wouldn't see her there. I'm sure those girls weren't stupid. They knew something was going on even at that age. And he strapped them in and headed for Andarko Site 319 to go ahead and dispose of the body because he knew he could dig a pit there. He took shovels. He took everything he needed. He was wearing baggy sweatpants and a baggy shirt and was carrying along his Andarko uniform. Once he got to the site, he drove way away from the wells, about 30 or 40 feet away from the wells. He dug a hole about 1 foot wide, 6 inches deep, and he put Shanann's body in it and covered her with dirt. I can only imagine he was thinking of coming back because you don't adequately dispose of a body in 6 inches of dirt. So anyway, I swear if there's ever a murder in my small town, they're going to come at me because I've said many times I could hide a body better than this person. But he puts her in, he buries her. Then he said he goes back to his truck and it's time to dispose of the girls. He first smothers young Cece, 3 years old, with a blanket and takes her out to one of the oil wells and forces her down into the crude oil. He then comes back to the truck, according to him, and does the same thing to Bella. Now, Bella is said to have told him, "Daddy, please don't do to me what you just did to Cece." But he did. He smothered her with a blanket, and according to the autopsy on Bella, her roof of her mouth was pretty well jinged. She had wounds on her hands where she was evidently fighting for her life at 4 years old, and also had the flap that you have here under your tongue as well as the one under your lip. Those were both split. So she was biting, fighting, slapping before she lost her life. He then takes her body to the other oil head and forces her. He had to force her through because it was a very small opening. Part of her hair caught and remained on the top of the oil well. And that was later noted when they took both bodies out. Okay, now let's get into part 5, the timeline and the days after the crime. About 10:45 a.m., Nikki Atkinson and her son arrived at Shanann at the Watts home. Shanann was not answering phone calls or texts. She was scared that something had happened. She was texting Chris. She was texting Shanann, furiously trying to find out if anyone was there. She actually drove up with her son to the house and didn't see anything, knocked, didn't get anybody to the door. So she said, "I'm not going to panic. Maybe she's already on the way to the doctor's office." So her and her son left and actually went to her OBGYN's office to see if they could catch her there. Okay. So back with Chris, after he's done the deeds with his family, he's still on the work site in those dirty clothes that he just dug that hole with when Cody Roberts and Melissa Parrish, also Andarko employees, pulled up at the job site just after 6 a.m. And Melissa Parrish and Cody both made notes that Chris was dressed in civilian clothes, non-work clothes, and had a shovel. It looked as though he had just been doing some stuff. His work truck was also pulled several feet away from the oil heads that he would be repairing, so they just thought it was weird. But Chris did change into his work clothes and head over to the oil heads to work on the oil leaks. Another thing that Melissa Parrish noticed is that Chris was uniquely neat, and whenever he worked on an oil leak or anything like that, he was very meticulous about cleaning up after himself, about cleaning up after the leak. None of that happened that day. She said he left oil on the ground. It was very unusual. He then, after fixing the leak, drove his work truck to a local gas station and bought a breakfast sandwich and coffee. All the time he's texting people. He's got Nicole starting to text him because she's worried about Shanann. He's got other things that he has to deal with as well as work texts. One of the first things he did about 8:45 was to call the girls' school, Primrose School of Erie, private preschool, and tell them he was withdrawing them because he and Shanann were splitting up and they were moving and didn't know where they would be. Shannon Meyer, who worked at the Primrose School, said, "That's very sad. I'm so sorry." He said, "Wait a minute, are they there yet?" Acting as if he didn't know they weren't going to be there. And she actually went and talked to one of the teachers and said, "No, they're not here today." He says, "We'll just withdraw them. We won't be sending them this year." And they, of course, asked, "Well, do you want us to keep them on the waiting list just in case you change your mind?" He said, "Sure, go ahead." Right after that, it was just after 9 o'clock, he called Ann Meadows, their realtor, who was surprised to hear from him. He never heard anyone. She never dealt with anyone but Shanann. He told her to go ahead and get the house on the market, that he and Shanann were splitting up and they were going to sell the house. He then called the resort in Aspen and canceled their trip set for the 17th. Meanwhile, Nicole, having gone to the OBGYN's office, noting that Shanann wasn't there, headed right back to the Watts house. She actually had the door code, so she used it and tried to open it up, but it was secured with the night chain, so you couldn't actually open it. She said she was able to see through and nothing looked out of place except the old flip-flops that Shanann wore everywhere were within view of the door. And she said unless Shanann was dressed up in like heels and stuff, she would have had those flip-flops on. So she was very upset. She actually pulled her car up close to the garage so that she could get up on the hood of her car and look into the garage, and she saw the white Lexus that Shanann had earned from Louisville sitting there, and she knew something was wrong. She continued to text Chris. She tried to call him. He wouldn't answer, so she continued, "I'm worried about Shanann. Where is she?" And she said Chris would only text back, "She's with a friend." And it was just infuriating. It's like Nicole knew somewhere in her soul that something was wrong. So she called Sandy Ruzick, Shanann's mom, and asked her if she had heard from Shanann. And Sandy says, "No, I haven't, and I'm really worried because I had a premonition this morning." She said it was the Holy Spirit. This is a deeply religious woman. Had spoke Shanann's name to her in a whisper, and she said she had a cold chill shoot up the back of her spine, and she felt something was wrong. Please help her find her daughter. So Shanann texts Chris when he's not responding. She says, I'm calling the police." And Chris goes, "No, don't call the police. Don't call the police." And Nikki pretty much said, "I'm calling the police, asshole." Also, another friend of theirs from Louisville named Cassie was also starting to text Chris because Nikki had alerted everybody trying to find Shanann. So finally, Chris said, "I'm on my way home. Don't call the police." Well, Nikki went ahead and called the cops and Sandy around 1:30, saying she had got the police involved. And around 1:35, Officer Coonrod, the first police officer on the scene, pulled up. And here I'm going to insert some footage from his body cam where he started to walk around the house to see if he could see anything, where he found no sign of any life in the house except for the Watts' dog barking from the inside.
Dropped her off at 2 o'clock this morning. She's 15 weeks pregnant. She wasn't feeling well, and she had a doctor's appointment this morning at 9, and I told her to let me know if she needed me to take her. She's got 2 little girls, and she was very distraught over the weekend, wasn't eating normally or drinking, and we kept trying to force it on her because she's pregnant. Her husband and her supposedly are separating, but she didn't know this. She thought they were just having issues. He disclosed that to me today. Because I called him and I was like, "Have you talked or heard from Shanann since she left for work this morning? Because I can't get a hold of her." I called, I texted. Her car's in the garage. Her shoes she wears every single day right in the front door.
She only has one vehicle?
No, they only have the one vehicle in his work truck.
Okay, that's what I'm asking. There's
She
not
took the girls and went on a play date, but they're 4 and 2. She went on a play date. Why wouldn't she take in a car?
Finally, a few minutes later, after contacting Chris Watts, Officer Coonrod called him and said, "Do you know the code to the garage so that I can get into your house to do a welfare check?" And of course, Chris is acting pretty calm, saying, "No, she's with a friend, but if you want to get in, you can't because the code doesn't work. So I'm on my way home. I'll be there in just a few minutes." So they start to wait, and eventually Chris does pull up, and here's a clip of what happened as soon as Chris Watts pulled up. You'll notice him go into the garage and immediately open Shanann's Lexus, take something out that we don't see, put it in his pocket, and then go into the house to open the door for Officer Coonrod.
Scott, how you doing?
How's it going?
So this is the only vehicle she would have?
Only one that, yeah.
She would drive? Okay.
Meanwhile, you have a neighbor coming across that offered to let Officer Coonrod look at their security camera footage. It said would have caught everything that happened that morning. So Chris and Officer Coonrod go into the neighbor's house and watch the footage. The entire time they're there, Chris is gibbering and jabbering very nervously about different things, and I'll insert some footage here.
Well, was out so far.
Is this on continually
Yep.
recording?
Yep. Well,
It's not, is it
any
motion or is it?
event.
Okay, so it's motion. My detective just showed up, so he'll probably want to talk to you. He'd probably, like I said, he might have you call at the bank and see if there's any kind of activity.
Because if there is any sort of action out
On
there,
his cameras.
I would have got it.
Like,
Right.
we had issues the other week when people were stealing stuff out of, like, garages and stuff like that. And I had parked my truck
I had
here.
to park right here.
Yeah. So someone,
See if
I could see
anything
where someone tried to jimmy with a flathead screwdriver over there. And it was just like,
But if any action would have happened, any cars or anything left your house, I would
if
have
it would
got
have
it.
been, like, right in that area, they should have picked me.
Oh, it'll pick up anything coming down the street this way.
You know where that tree there too?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
All right, I appreciate your time.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks.
Hopefully something comes up here.
Mind if you just want to go talk to him? I'm going to get his info real quick. No.
And immediately after it's over, as you heard, the neighbor told Officer Coonrod that he was acting way weird. And he also almost never pulled back the truck in. It always stayed on the street. So eventually they go over back into the house, and Officer Coonrod starts to investigate the house. They noticed it was pretty clean, nothing really out of shape. They go upstairs, they check the closets. Chris actually, when they go into the closet, he asks Chris, "Is anything missing?" And Chris looks around and says, "I couldn't tell because she has so many clothes. I couldn't really tell if a little bit was missing. I don't see it." And then Chris had
Bag or anything?
This and all that in the bottom, so it'd be kind of hard to tell if you took a little bit, or, I mean, it'd be easy to tell if you took a lot, but.
admits that they are, when Officer Coonrod asks Chris whether or not the marriage is good, he says, "Well, we're doing a separation." And he goes, "Well, how's that going?" He goes, "It's going." And I'll insert some more footage here.
Does she work?
Yeah, she works from home.
Oh, from home?
She works, this is her lifeline.
You guys having any kind of issues, marital issues, or
We're going through separation.
you are? Did you guys file it yet or anything, or just talking?
No, we're gonna sell the house and do a separation.
Now, how's that going?
I mean, it's going
Civil for the most
civil.
part, or?
As you can see, Chris actually found the wedding ring in the bedroom, brings that out, and by that time, he's actually called for detectives, and Detective David Baumhauer, Detective Mark James are there and start to question Chris. He refuses to let them do anything more without a warrant, And so they leave. So August 14th, you have the 2 detectives coming back with dogs and everything else and doing a thorough investigation of the house. One thing they do know is that the house smells entirely like bleach and cleaning products, that Chris had evidently done everything from washing the walls to vacuuming. The sheets that were on the bed with the missing bedspreads, those were found in the trash. It looked like they had makeup stains on them. So they found all that stuff in the trash. If he was wanting to clean up the house, I would think that he would burn them or something. But anyway, they start to talk to Chris, and he admits at that time that Shanann gave him no access to banking, so he wouldn't know if she was spending their money anywhere. And then they call Anadarko and basically get the GPS pulls of Chris's truck so they can see exactly where he was that day. Meanwhile, some friends of Chris's came over. Lauren, who was a high school friend of Shanann, who had actually also lived in Colorado, came in, as well as Amanda and Nick Thayer, some neighbors of them. They had met when they first bought the house. Came in, and both of them were kind of shocked when Chris told them that the marriage was dissolving. And the Thayers actually asked Chris if he wanted to stay with them, and he said, no, I just want to stay home. David Colon, a friend of Shanann and Chris's from Long Bay, came in. He talked to Chris. Chris told him about the marriage, and David says he wasn't actually surprised because even though he liked Shanann, he found her too controlling and even followed her on Facebook because of the huge amount of Thrive stuff she posted. He also said he always thought Chris's posts were weird and unmanlike. Come to find out, Shanann was doing those. And this is where we have that famous front porch interview by the local Denver station where Chris is shifting from foot to foot and just acting really weird. I won't insert any footage of that because we've all seen it 100 times, but all you have to do is Google Chris Watts front porch interview. You can see that in its entirety, but he was very shifty and very unbelievable to me in that interview. Finally, they take Chris downtown and interrogate him. He finally admits to an affair with Nicole. So they reach out to interview Nicole, and that's where they get all the information about Chris Watts and her relationship. Also, once contacted them, Nicole said that she told him she deleted a lot of stuff because she got mad at Chris when she read in the papers about the missing pregnant wife and kids. So still a lot of weirdness there. But finally, on the 15th, Chris breaks down under constant interrogation by the 2 detectives who aren't believing a word he says and says, we want to know the truth. Would you confess it to someone else? And he said, I want to talk to my dad. So they go out and they get Ronnie Watts, who's finally flown out to Colorado to be with his son. And they bring him into the interrogation room, and he confesses to killing his wife, though the excuse he gave is that Shanann killed the children, and he killed Shanann when he saw the children dead. And that's the story he gives his father, and that's the story he sticks with until much, much later when he confesses that he killed all 3. The aftermath. Chris Watts pled guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder, 2 for each of the children, because Colorado law charges you double time with murder if the child is under the age of 12. He got 1 count of first-degree murder on taking Shanann's life, and 1 count of unlawful termination of pregnancy in the death of little Nico. He also got 1 count of tampering with a dead body. Basically, he's serving about 4 life sentences and a 40-year sentence concurrently. He will never walk out of prison. He was put on suicide watch immediately after being taken into custody and solitary confinement because prisoners that hurt their families don't do so well. So he had a picture of his family and the Bible and nothing else. Of course, Cindy and Ronnie stand by their son, and they furnish him with commissary money. I'm sure it'll be in their will that he'll have a certain amount of commissary money. And from what we know, Chris Watts, though he's been transferred to Wisconsin for his safety, he's still living in solitary confinement, eating a lot of sweets and unhealthy food from the commissary. Has put on a lot of weight and is still kind of watched for his own safety. What happened to Nicole in late 2018, it was revealed that she had to leave the state of Colorado because as people found out more, not only did she delete all the stuff between her and Chris Watts from her phone, she was also found to have Googled things like how to do a book deal. Can I be held responsible for these murders? What happened to Lacy, in the Lacy Peterson case, Scott Peterson's mistress? She Googled what happened to her because she was really afraid for her own safety. And for her own safety, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation placed her in a witness protection program, changed her name, and moved her to a new job and a new life in another state. And she's out there. We'll probably never know. But so concludes the Watts case. It's still one of those that's just, anytime you have a family annihilator, and that's what anyone that wipes out their entire family is a family annihilator, there's always a wonder of why they did it. And those people tend to fit into one of three categories. Either they're just sadistic, somebody that is just total sociopathic and has no real feelings. I've seen a lot of reports that say Chris Watts is a sociopath and a psychopath. I don't know for sure. I haven't seen any actual, psychiatric evaluations for you, but that's what I've heard. So they either fall into that just really don't care, or they fall into the category of they see their family as a representation of their failures because they failed at their career or something like that. And then there's this type of killer that just sees the family as an obstacle to their true happiness. And I think that's where Chris Watts fell. I really do. Do I think it was a difficult marriage? Yes, for both of them. It was a very difficult marriage. And I don't think they would have lasted even if this hadn't happened. I think they were well on their way to divorce. I don't know how well that would have gone, and probably Chris saw, the financial ramifications of having to pay child support and alimony and all that stuff. So this was just a very tragic case, a case of two people that should never have gotten married. But sometimes we just don't know. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. Please support the channel. Links are down below. I really appreciate it. Please like, comment, share, subscribe. Until next time, Keto Comic, out.